Welcome. It's a pleasure to present the first incarnation of our Creative Fellowships, of which Fanny Howe is the first recipient. I've spoken before of a vision for the poetry room as a space of solitary meditation and a source of solidarity and social life. The Creative Fellowships help fulfill another vision we've had for the room, which is to create a site of synthesis, not unlike poetry itself, recombinant, constantly reshaped and revised by those who enter. Not merely an archive that acts as a memorial to the past, but a space that enacts what Stanley Cavell has called the task of onwardness. The Creative Fellowships were established to provide poets with funding and time to generate new works of art from our resources, be those resources texts, recordings, persons. And in the hands of Fanny Howe, fellowship is not only what generated the possibilities this year, but what was the form the work itself took. Infinitely collaborative and full of affinity, her cinematic work embodies not only the freedom of meeting and of association, which is one of the fundaments of poetry, but the freedom of meeting herself again. It's not surprising, perhaps, that her final film tonight, Be Again, which was originally filmed in the early 90s and was substantially revised this year, integrates excerpts from Dante, who, as critic Susan Stewart has written, embodied the role of the poet as one who actively revisits, critiques, challenges, and reintegrates his or her earlier work and being, and goes, quote, beyond mere change as novelty to the exploration and exhilaration of antithetical possibilities. For a poet of this kind, says Stewart, there is no end to the resources in wait for him or her. It is our hope that this small fellowship has served to revive this essential resource in Fanny, and that film will constitute a renewed meeting place for her imagination in the years to come. Here to introduce Fanny Howe more fully is the scholar Keith Jones. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you, Christina, for organizing what I trust will be an extraordinary evening dedicated to the films of Fanny Howe. We are here tonight to see and discuss how and in what astonishing ways Fanny's turn to film extends, illuminates, and crystallizes her poetics, her politics, her attentions and beliefs, and the wondrous philosophical lucidity of her thought. While tonight is an occasion to see three of Fanny's films, new iterations of each, incidentally, I do want to emphasize that to think her filmic practice requires us not to consider it as a departure from her essays, her novels, or her poetry, but rather as further evidence of how fully her genius lie in making genres overlap and misbehave. If we imagine genre as a territory, she is the trespass figure at its margins. Without preempting your own experience, I will say a few words about each film in the interest of providing something of a context for considering together and thinking through their many marvelous instances, their textures and atmospheres, their affects and their charisma. For those of us who are already in awe of the way her fiction and nonfiction, prose and poetry collapse and tangle and fuse, I trust you will find in her films this evening that fabulous, transportative spell she casts over words and images, conveying us through rich, complicated worlds wherein paradox is permitted, but love and hope and goodness remain. In tonight's opening film, Brigid of Murroe, a wonder tale shot in 2014, sound is the first thing like breath. It begins with Gaelic, evatic incantation. We enter as if in an underworld on a land bridge of ice, a mythic melting away to a taxonomy which brings into being a teeming new world, which is Ireland. This is Fanny's and Sheila Gallagher's inhabitation of St. Brigid's birth. There are rapturous blurrings, edgings, admixtures of sound and voice. It is a total picture of the porousness of life forms, all leaking light, flaring up, scrawling their effects on water. Affinities bloom as with the origins of all things, which are never singular, never punctual, and never closed. We are, the film tells us, still in the event of Brigid's birth. There is a wonderful keeping of time, a beautiful braid of past and present. There's even a stunning Bressonian moment where the camera's eye dramatically dwells on mud-plashed hooves. In a glorious crescendo-like moment, the narrator will say, there were several Brigids by the time she was 10 and ready to leave Murroe. We are left to ask, are there many mystics or one? A mysticism or many? Are all pasts and futures dream states of now? The film is a gorgeous proliferation of hope, of origins without end. This is its wonder and triumph. The second film we will see this evening, What Nobody Saw, originally shot in 1987, begins with a baby wailing for the thing the camera's eye is confronted with, a mother's breast. It is shot as if a wedge of moon, the infant's sustenance and basic tie to the earth, half in eclipse. Indeed, the film begins under the sign of things severed, of relations in disrepair. We are in a fallen world, a world of dereliction. The new cannot be added on, we are told, but it is there. It is there in the rendering of its ruins as a present overfilled and crumbling by the weight of a future to come that is already the past we have yet to recover from or move beyond. This improbable, baffling fold of time where past and future temporalities touch is Fanny's exquisite gift. The film has an eerie science fiction feel in that Tarkovsky sense of images, cultures, peoples that are at once torn out of time and returned to times that are strange to them. As the film's eye takes in the debris of its world, the narrator will ask, is God a help? In that mercurial end-of-the-day light, in all its symbolism, where or what, the film asks, is order, is truth? Where or in what lie our obligations to others? The final film we will see, Be Again, shot in 1992, opens on Killiney Hill, Dublin, with a strong, deafening wind and wood pigeons coo. The voiceover begins just as a figure appears before us who we assume is the voice's embodiment, an old man on his proverbial 3 legs, 2 feet, and a cane. Then the film, for the first time, pauses. In this film, the camera is in Fanny's hands, and she is following a figure with whom she will never catch up. We drift behind, seeing what she sees, but only from a distance and only from the outside. Even the voiceover, which typically permits access to a character's interiority, will not serve that function here. There are utterances, and they are beautiful, but they could have been spoken by any noumena within the film's diegetic space. The sky, the clouds, the wind, the cypress tree, the ocean, the arbor, for each seems sealed off one from the other, the narrator just another indwelling presence among them. What we do know is that the film pauses repeatedly, by my count 7 times. There's even this magnificent stutter roughly 3 minutes in where the camera doesn't seem to know quite what to do, merely to linger or to fully pause. And it feels writerly, like we're watching a sentence written over again, but softly. There's thus this kindness and fondness to these pauses, for when the camera rests, it's as if we too are given a moment to catch our breath, to gather ourselves and our thoughts. And yet they're never quite long enough. Indeed, we never fully catch up to the old man who is always already ahead of us, vanishing into the very trail that is the aura of his character. Fanny has quoted Simone Weil as having said, "The beings I love are creatures. They are born by chance." I want to think of these films tonight as creatures born of chance, and I hope you too, as I have, learn to love them. Please join me in welcoming Fanny Howe.
Thank you all for being here, and for Keith for that beautiful piece of writing and statement. Sheila and I have done everything together that we're going to present tonight. And behind are going to be drafts of the first film, Brigid of Murroe, that we sort of assembled and created together. So they demonstrate the uncertainty of the beginning stages of work. So tonight, the first film we'll show is the one that Keith spoke of, called Brigid of Murroe. And after it, we'll show the one with the voice of Robert Creeley. And that film, What Nobody Saw, shows two grown-up people and a child. But a lot of the footage tonight has to do with children in some sense. And that film was made with Gianvito, who's a wonderful filmmaker, and he told me about a year ago that I could do whatever I wanted with it. But all I did was try to change the soundtrack, because his film is so beautiful. And then, as Keith said, the third will be the little short film about that shows my uncle in Ireland. Sheila and I would sit in the Café Algiers with her computer and pens and paper, preparing for this film, without knowing why we were doing it. We only knew that we were supposed to show something at Glenstall Abbey in Ireland last summer, and the ghost of Brigid was in a lot of the monastic minds there. So we didn't even really care about Brigid, the patron saint of Ireland. And so we had to sort of come up with a reason to care. And that was, and then behind that, of course, there's always the great existential question of why are we bothering to make anything at all? But usually a wish is a secret first, even to yourself. Then it finds its corresponding weight in the world. They meet and give birth to an idea that develops in darkness. These scrawls on the screen are equivalent to the little scratches a fetus might make on the wall of the uterus. Let me out. Sometimes a task is given and someone calls, and you have to seek out your secret wish and match it up with the needs of the caller. Sheila is going to actually give the story of the film's literal magic and evolution. But I wanted to pursue a thought I keep trying to get out of me, something that keeps fleeing and evading my speech or articulation. And that's why do we do this scratching at words in order to get to a beginning or a bare space of some kind? To return to infancy, to be without speech, the threshold between Eden and heaven, ground and cloud. Hollowed out, each image will lose its definitions bit by bit. A nymph in purgatory still wears her headscarf. Or is it the sunlight lying on the floor? We try to domesticate our spirits like children. We chase and chastise them until they change. We spend our lives trying to release them again then. But into what? I see the loss of a certain spirit in us as the loss of a child. The fresh mind of infancy and play is the most interior and submerged part of ourselves, erased and rewritten over the years. What is left is the longing for it, to be able to locate it with the words, I recognize you. As if this submerged figure is still watching us through the thickets of experience, through the physical body that has covered it over and shed its cells by the 7th year. Cells like inscriptions. The child becomes a new person between 8 and 12 years old, years that are often hard for grown-up people to remember. That's because the figure of this child is empty as it is light. is renamed, reconstituted, sexualized, and hardened into a man or woman. The archetype of the divine child is usually an infant, but not always. The divine child can continue as a preteen, an angelic boy or girl paused before its vanishing. The child's resistance is futile. No matter how hard it struggles to stop its horrifying metamorphosis into a grown-up. To this child we pay homage with our deeds and our choices and tasks, because it remains forever potential. Or it went another way and never returned. It haunts us not as the fixed past, but as something we gave up too casually, because there was no other way. Brigid, to me, is an archetypal originary child. This is what I decided she would be. That is, a child who is androgynous, not finished, but complete. This child is dissolved by fierce hormones and only seems to survive them in the empty spaces that run ahead and around us, neither male nor female, indefinable, being our own. Brigid, otherwise known as the patron saint of Ireland, began as a pagan goddess until she was born on Earth. And here she made her home in the great outdoors. This is the way, as I say, I've made her into something that I can love. This is one of the unique facets of her long story. She was a goddess to the Druids, then she was a human, and later became a saint. She multiplied through legends and through her historical functions too, as abbess and artist. In a way, she shows us the way gods were formed in the heavens, where they were what we now call the weather and the passing clouds. Brigid may be the only one who spanned the abyss between sky and earth. We have many stories of gods becoming mortal, or trees and flowers, but none with a long human history and legacy. She's associated with nature, wells, cows, oak trees, water, honey, grain, or whiskey, and fire. She could work a forge and make pots, pans, and amulets. She lived with 6 virgins and slept with the same one every night of her life. This is the grown Brigid people revere, a sensible, monastic, and generous fertility figure, more like Ceres than her daughter Persephone. But it's the child Brigid who won my heart, more Persephone than Ceres, who herself was a woman pursuing a child. The Brigid you will see is an unmanifested child who oversees and voices over our failures to get to the open field and fresh water, to locate the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. I've noticed that reading aloud to a child puts the adult in the role of an authority who is also on the side of the child. This contradiction is so strong, it might explain why children fall asleep when you read to them. Sheila and I decided to capture Brigid as a read-aloud story on film. We went to the exact place on the ground where I feel a child is still playing. Sheila is a magician with paint, plastic, and color. I would like her, therefore, now to describe the strange pursuit of Brigid.
Thank you, Sarah. First, I just want to say thank you so much. It's a huge honor to be here tonight with Fanny because it really is her night. And consequently, I'm going to try to keep my remarks pretty short. Collaborating with Fanny on our little video, Brigid of Murroe, that I'm going to show you, has been full of magical coincidences and little epiphanies, and also, as you could see from the collage of revisions and moving images, a scab that we sort of keep picking because we can't get it quite right, or maybe right isn't the right word. The project for me started in the summer of 2012 when I visited the extraordinary Benedictine monastery called Glenstal in Murroe, Ireland, where Fanny has been sort of an honorary poet monk in residence herself for years, and our mutual friend, the philosopher Richard Carney, had gone to school. And all of us share a very special connection to an amazing person there named Patrick, who's an abbot and with whom we, in different ways, communicate consciously and unconsciously in words and dreams and prayers. He sees things in threes. I'd become interested in the strange figure of St. Brigid when I read that in the 5th century, she had not only established a co-ed monastery in Kildare, which means the Church of the Oak, but also the first art school, which was created to make illuminated manuscripts. At the same time, in 2012, Fanny and I were both reading our friend Richard's drafts of a novel in which Brigid also appears as a kind of hidden character who spirits through the story. When I first started doing research and found that Brigid was the patron saint of poetry and healing and art, and also children who do not live with their parents or are abused, and dairy farmers, I recognized Fanny as one of her incarnations. Fanny is also someone who, like St. Brigid, if she was put ahead of a dairy farm, would no doubt have a white cow with red ears and give all of the milk away to the hungry. The first summer at that monastery, I filmed Fanny doing all sorts of weird things, miracles, talking to donkeys, and putting her fingers in a lake to melt the ice to free a fish had been frozen underneath, according to one Brigid hagiographer. And thinking I was maybe doing a documentary, I also filmed an incredible monk, Sean O'Dunn, who himself is this childlike Brigid figure, both a scholarly expert on the rites of St. Brigid, but also somebody who seamlessly inhabits another more innocent world of nature goddesses that existed before churches. I filmed him for 4 hours, and maybe I will show you a little clip at the end. And after weeks of making pilgrimages to Brigid Wells and gathering all of this footage, I had tons and tons of video. And I sat on it for a year, and I kept on thinking that it was going to percolate and gel, and it never did. I had images, but no words, and I really didn't know what to do until enter Fanny. And as she said, we'd have tea at Algiers. We talked about Brigid and saints and who the hell are they and what are they and what do you do with them and who needs them. And she wrote dozens of notes and versions and poems and really full-on essays. And it seems like she just wrote another one tonight as well. And at one point, after months of us talking about all of this and being completely engaged, Fanny announced quite coldly that she was not at all interested in Brigid at all, or saints at all, and I was completely heartbroken. I had no story, I had no structure, and then there was a little miracle. And I got this email from Fanny that says that she discovered that shortly after her birth, Brigid was sent away to foster care in Murroe, to this tiny little charged sacred place in the world where Glenstal, the monastery, is located. The exact place where I'd filmed Fanny was the same place where the child Brigid had played. This was the coincidence that allowed Fanny to re-enter the project again, and this time looking for the child. And I realize now that this sort of negative theology, a hard turning away that can enable a return to a different permutation, is a key part of the hundreds of indecisions, visions, and revisions that marks the creative and collaborative process, at least with us. The next summer in Glenstal came the second sign. We were again at Glenstal, and Fanny took a walk in the woods near the monastery, one of the last surviving primeval oak forests in Europe, where Brigid must have walked. And there she found a Kit Kat wrapper, definitive proof of the child saint. Yeah. I finished the first little video of sorts with Fanny's words and my images in the fall of 2013, and I showed it in the bathroom of the Dodge Gallery in New York. We called it a work in progress, and it was not for sale. We both felt it was too pious, too pretty, too definitive, and it was really only saved by the line, I think, that the shithole is the site of a mess made holy, and which inspired me, I think at Fanny's encouragement, to put a pile of manure that my mother gathered in New Jersey and surrounded it by marigolds on the bathroom floor. There's Fanny. The third little miracle came last summer. We went back to Glenstall for a solstice gathering about Brigid, and I carved a piece of oak, a cross-section of oak from Boston with some of Fanny's distilled lines, and I flew it with me to Ireland, and we took it out into the 3,000-year-old Brigid woods, and we projected images on the wood and drank whiskey and ate Kit Kats with Father Anthony, a Druid priest who knows everything about trees, and then underneath the images seemed to miraculously appear a female figure. And so Brigid, who intrigues and inspires, because for me she really is this site of endless projections and possibilities for transmutation and revisions, was there. She was there in the woods and is still there, trying to emerge out of the dark wood. So these are the few little images. That's St. Brigid's cross. This was just a flash of light that made its way into St. Brigid. That's an image of St. Brigid. And finally, Guanyin, a kind of a Buddhist Chinese representation of Brigid. So now finally I'm going to show you the second Brigid video, which we made to be shown at the monastery last year with my images and Fanny's words, and also the voice of her granddaughter.
Ran Carog, Travon, Canagre, Colum, Colmon, Colur, Pigeon, Car, Drid, Allah, Fuilon, Fiach Dov, Fushog.
Not long before this story began, the Irish Sea was a freshwater lake, and the first humans crossed a land bridge that was only a thin bar of ice from Britain. The sun raced over the icy hills of Ireland. And out of the melting water came maidenhair fern, sandwort, eyebright, fleabane, orchid, saxifrage, St. Patrick's cabbage, blue-eyed grass, a single strawberry tree, and salmon, with all of their names. There were gods and goddesses fading away with the ice and into the lakes, and the animals who became them. There were shepherds and slaves to take care of the cows and lambs. Many of the slaves were children. Into all this, a baby was born as a slave to her father. Her mother was a slave too, and sent far away when her child was born. The baby Brigid vomited when her Druid father touched her. He promptly sent her off to Murroe, a lovely part of Limerick, to live with the Ryan clan. It was in Murroe that Brigid resisted every form of bullying and bondage. so her foster family let her run freely. Off to the oak woods she went. There she began her studies. She learned to read from the shapes of twigs and stones and rushing water,
lily pads and fish. She traced a map of the woods of Murroe on the shell of a turtle. She smeared dyes on her finger from lupin, bluebells, and violet, then wet them with a drop of dew into loops and circles.
She saw eyes in everything, and eternity in the lives of bees and songbirds. The blackbird sang ecstatic melodies in the evening, her chosen time. She felt she was always being observed and accompanied. When it was frosty, the day was pinched and dark, like the shadows inside a cloak. She made herself a cloak out of spider webs. Or was it frost? It could stretch all the way to the moon. She was a girl in a headscarf who lived like an animal in the safety of night and shadow. She followed the workhorse that carried the milk pails to the booli with her hand on his foreleg. Tribes inhabited the woodlands where she roamed, and she fled every male one of them coming through the trees. This Brigid lived in the 5th century when people were writing poetry and screeds. She had her special cave up a rocky hill overlooking a scummy river. There she hid. Her first dwelling was made of potatoes that rotted in the rain. Her second was made of turf and manure, but these two sank with damp into stinkholes. She promised herself she would build a solid house of stone when she had a gang of girls like herself to join her in the building. This was still the childhood of the world. Persephone and the nymphs and the yellow meadow had barely left our sphere of time. While Brigid was in the forest, a few monks and druids were writing poems and songs. She had only herself out of which to create a dozen thoughts. Out of Murroe and in a dark cave, she knocked out syllables one by one, according to the new measures of time. Air was magic, whipping people away over the sea and land, never to be seen again. Brendan set sail on his raft, and Columkill wept, leaving Ireland, and disappeared. There were several Brigids by the time she was 10 and ready to leave Murroe. They multiplied through the shafts of air, one going one way, another going another, here and there around the countryside. All the Brigids were able to break through barriers of light and night to be in many towns at once. One put her finger in water and it became a well. One began as a rivulet and turned into an island shaped like a rabbit. One Brigid, like Francis 1,000 years later, formed a model for the church today, with men and women separate but equal in their lives devoted to poverty, community, quiet, and something else without a name. The child Brigid of Murroe lived off alone and slept on hay at night. She liked men called Patrick when they were monks and shepherds, but basically she was an original, an invisible girl. She still haunts a little grove of trees in Murroe, but only children know it. I will tell you soon why I care about her story, when once I have understood how it follows from all the work I've done over the years, and not before.
Oh, that was supposed to be cut. I know, horrible.
Um, so the next one will be 10 minutes plus 30 seconds. And we may not have time to do the little Irish one of my uncle, but I'll try to speed through this. This is the one that I made with Gianvito in 1987. It was, I had this idea about breaking into a place that was then, had been when I was a child, called Mattapan State Hospital. And it was abandoned and lay rotting on the road to Mattapan. And I always used to be terrified of it, but so that's why I wanted to get inside and film it, because of my childhood fear of it. And so we did, and we broke in through windows, and me and John and another film person, and then 3 actors, a man, a woman, and a child. And after it was done, I sent my script up to Robert Creeley in Buffalo and asked if he would read from it, and he immediately did. And then my friends also did a voiceover, but I've been tormented for years of not liking the voiceover at all. So it was when John said you can do whatever you want, I decided to go back and change the sound to just be Creeley speaking, because he's got such a lonely voice. It's always lonely, his poetry, and it fits so well with this horror story, which is actually a kind of, I also had in my mind the Persephone story even then, of all of them looking for each other. Okay, so we'll watch this now.
A true revolution is always beginning or about to. I'm swimming in a density of chemicals and meanings, so webbed within my anatomy, I can't even know whether my questions are part of the machine or floating over it. April 24th, 33 years later. What do you see from there? All my decisions have been wrong. It looks like mosquitoes and purple snakes are dyed into his polyester shirt. It's incumbent on us to seek the good in others. God, being unlimited, encompasses within itself the whole perfection of existence and won't stretch for something new to be added on. Interminabilis vitae tota simul et perfecta possessia. Is God a help? She will go wild and call it old. Like barbecued ribs and jazz, she will grow red and tragic. The American experiment works without history, and that's why it fails. October 15th, 46 years later, I see bark. When did I transgress my own shadow? When did mine change when I did? Shame is a chemical in the air here. May 13th, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. Learn your history, since you can't remember it. April 24th, 33 years later. I wonder what she sees. Her nipples pointed west through her jersey when we went to the Justice of the Peace. Penetrate or participate. I ran away, choosing personally to spend my life alone. I now prefer the indifferent and meaningless things in the world to all the rest. My wife's belly button was as curly and cloistered as a vine. On the hills, smoke from old Cochituate fires still makes me wonder where God wants me to be and why, anyway. She giggled through her cheeks. She said, "Satisfaction guaranteed," again and again. Ideology of a nobody. May something, 6 months before. I can't see much. If you called God the truth, wouldn't you feel better? The person comes to nothing. If you don't believe it, talk to a survivor. Everyone who didn't die yet is dying. Radiant as the head sun, I bet. Why do young people deny the possibility that any one of them might be a saint or a hero?
It's the man in the film is my uncle, John Manning, who was an electrical engineer and a camera person for short experimental films made in Dublin in the 1930s. He was someone who never left Ireland. He loved being there. And a childhood friend of his was Samuel Beckett, whom he revered and remembered from their walking together on Killiney Hill in Dublin, which is where this is shot. And I drew the text out of Dante's Purgatory, which, of course, Beckett loved, and I did too. But again, I've been unable to rest with the way this film looks. This is one that I was the only one involved until just now here at Harvard. I was helped a lot. I think that's it. I think Keith made me see that I was chasing along after my uncle, who I totally adored, and who never let me know if he knew I was there or loved me at all since I was a child. So I'm sort of going along behind him like this, and he never once looks. And I didn't realize it until you said that.
Imagine a renovated world with justice for all and innocence, and a human race capable of sustaining them. Enter into a new life knowing that you cannot go back to the old one. You can't even want to go back, or you will have to retreat. Some people walk slowly as from a terrible burden, one that they yearn to be free of by walking. Still, we are all citizens of the same city, We may have no one road assigned to us on earth or out of purgatory, but we are allowed to find our way, whatever it is, to this city. Some people are more like the light on a little candle. They are fixed but restless, as if questing for a bigger fire, the whole one they came from. When at sunset in purgatory, the dawn is in Jerusalem, and it's noon on the Ganges. If you are wondering how the world came to such a sorry state, examine how you came to be what you are. Expressing happiness makes birds happy. There is an ambience around each person created by the content of that person's character. Everybody needs a teacher, or else he or she stands utterly alone.
Now's the time. Christina, thank you so much. With that.
Or we can eat Kit Kats and no whiskey.
Yeah, I know, there's whiskey back there, and Kit Kats. Yes, Jim. Jane.
So Fanny, I remember the other version of the Mattapan film, and I wonder if you would consider putting your voice back in.
No, never.
Okay, that answers that.
Fanny, under Creeley's voice, there was an understated tribal soundtrack, and it was very mesmerizing. What was that? And it wasn't credited at the end of the movie, do you?
Well, Maceo Senna, I put his name there because he put it on recently.
Okay.
When I cut out the other voices and just left Creeley, I said, please put in some kind of a soundtrack.
No, it added
Yeah,
to it. Thanks.
yeah. I'm drinking whiskey.
It was wonderful. I'd like to talk to you more about Ireland. I've worked with Irish weed women, for instance. One named Teresa O'Mahony is very important in the West Cork area. But I was wondering, saying all that and how wonderful it was, I have a little bit of a critique.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to have the blackbird toned down about 80% in the last film as a more subliminal presence. I don't know what you think about that. It sort of dominates over the voice.
I'll think about that for sure.
Hi, thank you so much for showing these films. They were mesmerizing. I'm wondering about the difference in your process of editing, especially between the first and the second one, because the first one is quite literally illustrates the text, or even when the image is at times transcendent because of itself, like the moon that has 4 iterations and the stretching of the moon. But generally, it's very one-to-one, text and image. And in the second one, I didn't see that at all, and it transported me in a completely different way and allowed all kinds of kind of juxtapositions and concepts to emerge because I was trying to think between the image and text. So I'm wondering, especially, I'd love to have you both talk about the editing process. Thanks.
Well, to me, it was, like a children's story that I was reading aloud, so it was more illustrative in that sense. But you did all of that. You free.
Yeah, we actually tried to not have, because a lot of the images came even before the words, but then they sort of found their mates in the words, and but that was one of the hardest things, is not to have either the words illustrate the images or the images illustrate the words. But I think we were working so closely together, and we're so sort of sensitive to what the other person's idea was, and then how we could fuse those to a third thing, that it did end up being more illustrative. And but as Fanny said, also, I mean, sort of keeping the child's interest. It's at the tempo of that it's an image to a word, as you're flipping a book almost.
The other free-floating voice is something I was doing in fiction for years, was inserting some poetic statements or thoughts from a non-existent person, or else it could be thought of as a consciousness that everybody is sharing, but only one is expressing at the same time. So more like music.
But I'm glad to hear, because I'm glad to hear that you thought that because I thought a lot of them were sort of off, that the spider eating its young was the equivalent of the druid prince, raping his daughter. So yeah. Right? No, but that's when we have the spider.
But I didn't even know.
Yeah. There was actually a much darker version of this. The first one we did was way too light, the one that was in the bathroom. Yeah. And then Fanny rewrote a text that was incredibly dark and full of rapes and famine. But then she wanted her granddaughter to read part of the text, and so it got way cleaned up in the final.
Fanny, it's me again. The What Nobody Saw, not only did Creative's voice sound kind of lonely, but he also had a certain rhythm that synced up perfectly with the movie. So was he watching the movie as he read that, or did he do it blind?
He never saw the
That's
movie.
amazing.
Never.
Yeah.
He
Is
just literally so generously sat down and recorded it with his whole heart, sent me the tape, and then I cut and pasted the things around.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. James?
What was the bit that you meant to cut from the end of the first film?
Where I said about my work.
Oh, but I thought that was a lovely line.
Oh, no.
What was the line again?
I hate it so much I can't remember.
Oh no, I thought it was a great line.
No, it was about.
I'll tell you about it someday when I've finished all my work.
Yes,
I thought that
right.
was.
I'll tell you what it
Oh.
means when I finish.
Oh no, keep that.
Yeah, but not before then.
Yes. Okay.